Hello, it's time for French Politics here on France 24. I'm Mark Perlman.
And I'm Molly Hall. Coming up in today's show, tackling the Mount Everest of French education. The government looks to revamp the infamous baccalaureate exam.
And President Macron admits he failed in his pledge to help the homeless off the streets of Paris.
Plus, the president looks to boost patriotism by reviving a mandatory national service.
Mission impossible. That's how many observers describe the task undertaken by the Education Minister Jean-Michel Blanquer in his attempt to reform one of France's most sacred institutions, the baccalaureate.
That's right. Now, this national end of high school exam has been a fixture for all of the French, but the minister is determined to do away with it. Erno Gunke has the story.
He hopes to be the first education minister in 25 years to make significant changes to the baccalaureate, France's 200-year-old exam. Jean-Michel Blanquer believes that the time has finally come to embark on what many in France call a mission impossible. Created by Napoleon in 1808, the baccalaureate is a national end-of-high-school exam that allows students to obtain their high school diploma and also opens up access to university studies. While it's grown into a French rite of passage and even a symbol of Republican meritocracy, most agree it's time for the baccalaureate to be reformed. Many say it is too heavily dependent on a single series of final exams, and that it fails to adequately prepare students for university. Others cite the cost. The exam is expected to cost between 90 and 100 million euros by 2019. The overhaul, which was one of Emmanuel Macron's campaign promises, directly addresses these criticisms. After several weeks of consultations with unions, teachers, and parents, the reform was officially unveiled at this week's cabinet meeting. Today, the baccalaureate is composed of anywhere between 10 and 15 final exams, most of which take place at the end of the final year of high school. One of the primary goals of the reform is to reduce the weight of these tests. Under Blanquer's plan, obtention of the diploma would be based on just 4 final exams. Students would choose 2 of the 4 subjects, while philosophy and French literature would remain compulsory for all. The grade would also include a 30-minute oral presentation. These exams would count for 60% of the final grade, with the remaining 40% depending on continuous assessments over the last 2 years of high school. In passing this reform, Jean-Michel Blanquer seeks to achieve what some of his predecessors never could.
It's a collective Mount Everest. It's not the minister's Everest. It's France's Everest. We can come together on this because our goal is the success of our students. It's the public good.
In 2005, François Fillon, then education minister, proposed a baccalaureate reform that would have given more weight to continuous assessment and less to end-of-year exams. In response, some 100,000 students across France took to the streets to voice opposition to the proposal, preferring the anonymity of end-of-year tests to continuous assessments. 3 years later, Xavier Darcos, education minister under President Nicolas Sarkozy, proposed similar changes to no avail. But mentalities are gradually shifting. According to a French poll, 77% of the population favors changes to the baccalaureate exam. As for now, opposition to Blanquer's proposal has remained relatively weak. It is due to take effect in 2021.
Now, with winter in full effect, there's growing concern for the homeless living on the streets of Paris. By law, the French state has a duty to provide accommodation to people under the age of 18. But charities say a maze of complicated bureaucracy and a lack of beds means dozens of unaccompanied minors are sleeping on the streets. Claire Paquelin and Adelaide Mangan met with one of them.
Saliou is rapping in Wolof, the language he spoke growing up in Senegal. The 16-year-old dreams of becoming a rapper. 6 months ago, he left his family and friends in Dakar. He crossed the Sahara and then the Mediterranean before reaching Sicily and finally Paris, in the middle of winter.
Je dors dans les cartons toute la nuit. Le matin très tôt, je réveille. Je tourne. Comment je tourne les rues dans le Paris? C'est pas facile, c'est dur.
Charities which work with migrants and refugees say at least 100 unaccompanied minors are sleeping on the streets of Paris. Saliou does what he can to pass the time.
Mais je connais rien ici, je connais personne, c'est moi seul ici en Paris, ni père, ni mère, ni petit frère, ni grand frère, moi seul. Ouais, seulement c'est Dieu qui protège.
Saliou showed his birth certificate to the authorities. If he can prove he's 16, he'll be eligible for child protection.
C'est mon extrait de naissance. Quand je lui ai montré ça, on parle plus d'1 heure de temps après. Il m'a dit je doute.
His claim was turned down. The person who interviewed him at the Child Protection Unit wasn't convinced he was under 18, so his future's uncertain.
Et là, ce soir, tu dors où?
Je ne sais pas. Peut-être Dieu nous donne un hôtel ou dehors. Ouais.
Saliou managed to find a room in a homeless shelter for the next 2 nights. After that, though, he's likely to end up back in the streets. Here at the Porte de la Chapelle in the north of Paris, local charities and residents gather to offer food, clothing and advice to migrants. Some local residents have even offered beds in their homes for them to sleep in to make up for the lack of accommodation this winter.
Well, advocacy groups have vividly criticized Macron for failing to deliver on this promise. Speaking to journalists this week, the president admitted that the goal had indeed not been reached.
That's right. Now, in other news, we've got more details emerging here in France of the government's plans to reform the structure of Islam in the country.
That's right, Molly. Speaking to a Sunday newspaper, Emmanuel Macron said he plans to integrate worship better, combat fundamentalism, and preserve, quote-unquote, national cohesion.
And this is something his predecessors tried to do, but essentially failed. Nick Rushworth has the story.
The goal is to provide a better framework for Islam in France and, above all, explain Islam better to people. Emmanuel Macron revealed his approach in an interview with the Journal du Dimanche Sunday newspaper, saying that consultation with various religious groups and experts is ongoing.
I will not unveil any proposal until the work is completed. My approach on this subject is to move forward step by step.
Priorities include creating new bodies representing Muslims and greater control over how mosques are financed. The desire is to reduce the influence certain Arab countries have on French Islam, and so keep it in line with France's secular tradition.
My goal is to rediscover what lies at the heart of secularism, the possibility of being able to believe as not to believe in order to preserve national cohesion and the possibility of having free consciousness.
The president also alluded to setting up a French program for training imams. Around 300 imams working in France are currently paid by foreign countries. His plans for reorganizing Islam in France will be revealed in full in the coming weeks and will be scrutinized in what is a sensitive subject for France.
Back to the future. France is reviving its mandatory national service for all young people. The president says he's not bringing back a purely military service, but he wants to build social cohesion and patriotism by bringing young people from different backgrounds together.
Well, France scrapped its compulsory military service 2 decades ago, and opposition parties and experts warn about the costs. Well, the government sent confusing messages about its plan, with the defense minister saying the service would not be mandatory.
And this week, the president tried to settle the dust. He told journalists, "I want a mandatory service open to women and men, which will include a military dimension. It will be 3 to 6 months long, but this is not established yet." Obviously, still some doubts about the length of this mandatory service. However, the government plans to trial the program already next year.
Well, now, since his election, Emmanuel Macron has been critical of the traditional news media, preferring to spread his message through social networks. Earlier this week, the president decided it was time to mend the relationship with political reporters, and so he spent 2 hours with the presidential press corps, taking questions on all kinds of issues.
That was much appreciated by the press corps. However, the very next morning, and without any warning, the presidency decided to shut down the press room inside the Élysée, the presidential palace. Immediately, the Presidential Press Association protested, saying that this would be an obstacle. However, the government spokesman, Benjamin Griveaux, insisted the move was just about operational reasons.
Don't believe in the saying, out of sight, out of mind. It's simply to improve your working conditions, so a bigger space, more operational, and mostly, and I'm sure this will make you happy, it will enable us to welcome more of your colleagues under better conditions. I remind you that the Elysée will be less than 10 meters away from a bird's eye perspective from the space you'll be working under better conditions, so everyone can be happy about this.
And that's all we have time for this week.
Indeed, we'll see you again next time here on The Political Brief.
The Debate, hosted by François Picard.
Live from Paris, a debate on the big story of the day with experts, newsmakers and observers. Continue the debate after the show is over by sharing your views on our forums.
The Debate on France 24 and France24.com.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
On June the 5th, 1967, the Israeli army invaded Egyptian Sinai, unleashing a war that would change the face of the Middle East. During the Six-Day War, Israel took rapid possession of the Golan Heights, the West Bank and the Old City of Jerusalem, holy sites for Jews, Muslims and Christians alike. It's a stranglehold that the Israeli authorities have maintained to this day.
The Temple Mount and the Western Wall will forever remain under Israeli sovereignty.
50 years later, East Jerusalem still symbolizes the ascendancy of Israel, whose settlements policy has created tensions which are as strong today as ever and make the atmosphere in Jerusalem unique in the world.
Revisited.